Hello everyone. Today we are in Geneva with a special guest, Mr. Ben Clymer from Hodinkee.
Sir, how are you?
I'm fine. You, Ben?
Yeah, happy to be here.
You are in the sector since 2008.
Yes.
And I just want to know what is your best memory of the watch fair?
Oh, the watch fair.
And you are still excited to
I
be
am.
here?
Yeah, I am. That's a good question. This week is my favorite week of the year. You know, I think I got into the industry not necessarily because of the people, more for the product.
Yeah.
And I love the people now, yourself included, of course. But the product is still my great love, the things. And this is the week where you see all the new product. And I love vintage watches, as you know, but I also love new watches. And I think this week is the one that gets me most excited because you get to see what people have been working on for so long. So my greatest memory, I have many of them. The first time I met, I didn't meet Philippe Dufour at Basel, but I saw him for the second time at Basel. And getting to know him over the years at Basel, back over in Basel, was really a fun part. The very first time I got to go and see Rolex, which was a long time ago. Rolex back in the day didn't allow digital journalists.
Wow.
Believe it or not. This was over 10 years ago. So being basically the first digital journalist allowed inside Rolex at the booth was really exciting. Patek the same. I remember in 2013, I talked about this recently, I thought we'd have the 50th anniversary of the Steel Daytona. Instead we had the Platinum Daytona. I remember that very well. But so many personal memories as well. My friend Robert Jan Brewer and Frank Galen from the Netherlands used to host a schnitzel party every year at Basel. And those were always really fun. This was years ago, probably 10 years ago. But that was always a highlight because it was no business, just fun and beer and schnitzel. Basel was a really fun fair.
Yeah, because during this year, the watchmaking sector grows a lot.
Oh my God.
Grows a lot, not in terms also in numbers, but I think the most interesting part is that grows a lot also in terms of quality.
Yes.
So I remember that at the time, maybe a small brand like Tudor fits only 88 movement. Now we had just discovered last year the new manufacturer.
Yeah.
So what is your perception of the evolution?
Look, as a person who loves watches, it's nothing but good, right? I mean, I think that there's a lot of people in the industry, and I'm sure you know them, I know them as well, that have been around a long time, and I almost feel like they're not happy that watches now have success or now have young people interested. Yeah. I'm quite the opposite. Like that's why Hodinkee worked in the beginning. Is there were these wonderful platforms, the Purist, Time Zone in the US, that were really so much knowledge there, but there was a wall around them. It was walled off. And Hodinkee, we did the opposite. We said, let's broadcast it out, and anybody can read that wants. And I think a lot of folks from that era, I think, are, as I said, maybe a little unhappy about the popularity of watches. I love it. I think the fact that Tudor is now a big brand, Rolex is even bigger than it was before. Omega's doing great, Tag Heuer's doing great, Patek, Vacheron, AP. Like these brands were always important, but now they're sound and they're strong. And I think the thing that I always say on camera or any podcast is nobody needs watches. So to create an industry that can support this many jobs, this much creativity, this much dynamism, is really it shouldn't be taken for granted, because you shouldn't take anything for granted. In particular, watches that cost who knows how much, that tell worse time than my iPhone. This might tell better time than my iPhone, but I'm kidding. But it's There should be support and excitement around the fact that there's an industry now that can support us, all of us,
Speaking about the Watches and Wonder, so we see some novelties. And personally, I love the new release about Cartier.
Of course.
And the return of the Tortue, with the monopusher. So how you explain the renaissance of Cartier, especially for the youngest generation?
It's really quite amazing. And I think even if you go back just 3 years, 4 years, 5 years max, Cartier in the US, I mean, I'll speak about the US because I know it the best, didn't exist for men. For women, always strong, we know that. But for men, it was irrelevant for anybody but people like you and like me and like John Goldberger and people that really are connoisseurs. I've loved Cartier for the longest time. I've owned them for the longest time. But I remember looking at the old CP Asymmetrique, and they were $7,000. $7,000. And the monopusher, the THA monopusher, were $8,000. I mean, just really like nothing. And the idea of sports watches dominated, at least in the US, and I think probably globally as well. And then more recently, sports watches, still very strong, of course, but have died down, and now we see the emergence of things like Cartier and shaped watches and 1970s, 80s, 90s products. Everything is a cycle. When you and I probably first started to get into watches, it was vintage watches. Now nobody talks about vintage watches, in the commercial way. If you look at the price of a gilt Submariner, 5513, 5512, whatever, 1675 GMT, they're down quite a bit from their peaks. And do I think those will come back? I absolutely do. I don't know when. It could be 5 years, it could be 5 months, or maybe never, who knows? But everything works in cycles. And, when you think back to, I did a video talking watches with a gentleman named Jason Singer many years ago, an American collector.
Yeah.
One of the very few really good American collectors. He was known for collecting bubble back watches, which today, irrelevant, almost irrelevant, I would say. But in the early 80s, when he was buying them, they were a fortune. $30, $40, $50, $100,000 on a bubble back. Today, if you saw one for $10,000, well, $20,000, you'd be shocked. And so, will bubble backs come back? I think they might. I really think they might. So everything works in cycles. I think Cartier has done things masterfully, but I also think they've been the beneficiary of a lot of renewed focus on gentlemanly watches. People that are dressing well, and I think that's done really well. I think also the fact that these are gender agnostic, if that makes sense. They're not for men, they're not for women, they're just for people. And so a man can wear, Malika Crawford on our team does a great job talking about how, these are just watches. They're not for men or women. And I think Cartier has been a great beneficiary of that as well. In addition to them really refocusing on what Cartier does well, right? There were many years under Carol Forestier, who's amazing, one of the best watchmakers in the world, but they were doing Astro Tourbillons and, crazy stuff that it made sense in the moment because that's what people were interested in. But that's not what Cartier is about. Cartier is about design and shape.
Was also the years where also Tag Heuer made something super complicated.
Yeah. I think, look, every brand has a DNA, just like you have a DNA and so do I. And I think Cartier's DNA is shape and design and elegance. And, the Astro Tourbillons, I don't know if you remember the ID series, ID3, ID2, incredible things, but it was for a very particular type of client that I don't think exists anymore the way that it did before. Complications, for complication's sake, 10 years ago was everything.
Yeah.
You look at Patek, obviously, but JLC, the Gyro Tourbillons, which everyone thought those were the craziest things in the world 10 years ago. Cartier, Tag Heuer, as you rightfully said, complications were such an important thing. Now you see, I think, some of the most exceptional watches in the world are, Philippe Dufour and Recep Recepi and Kari Voutilainen and Simone Brett, and these things that are really very simple, but just done to such a degree that it takes watchmaking into an artistry, and I think Cartier sees that as well.
I think that today the people want on their wrist something that it's like a statement, because today we all have the same. For example,
same phone.
We have the same phone.
Yeah, same color too.
Same color too. So probably the wristwatch is something that can express your personality, and want something that, like Cartier, have his own personality on the wrist. Is more recognizable.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's my view.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think there's a simple. I'll borrow a term that I don't love, but it's quiet luxury.
Yeah.
Which is like a joke in the U.S., but at the same time, the idea of
if you know.
Exactly. Yeah. And the idea of you wearing this or me wearing this or Asymmetrique or Centré or some beautiful Cartier says so much more than if it had a giant rotating tourbillon on it. Yeah. And to be clear, look, I have a Royal Oak RD3 which has a tourbillon. I love it, but I love it for a different reason. It's not it's elegant in that it's small and thin. But it is a little dorky, it's like it's a very watchy type of thing, and I think there's the right moment for that as well. But the idea of the big oversized watches with flying tourbillons and orbital movements and the Urwerks, the MB&Fs, which are doing great, but it's a very particular type of consumer.
Since 2008, the watchmaking is grows a lot, the watchmaking sector. So, in your opinion, how is important the personality like Jay-Z, like one of your friends, John Mayer,
sure.
In the perception of the watches, of the wrist watches. So I think that they are one of the reasons now the watches are mainstream.
Yeah, I think people like John, like Jay-Z, like Kevin Hart today, or whoever, it's incredibly important. And I think the idea that this is a recent trend is a fallacy, is a farce. If you look at the Cartier booth historically over in Pal Expo, whose watches do you see? You see Fred Astaire, right? You see Elizabeth Taylor. You see famous people of yesteryear, 100 years ago in some cases. You see their watches. Those watches, those people, they weren't on Instagram every day like Jay-Z or John Mayer is today, but those were in newspapers, magazines, periodicals all the time. And when somebody saw Fred Astaire wearing a tank, they said, wow, Fred Astaire wears a Cartier, I want a Cartier. So you're absolutely right, but it's nothing new. And I think there's a lot of people that say, oh, who cares what a basketball player wears, or LeBron James, or whoever, Leonardo DiCaprio, when he had the Tiffany Nautilus, you know. Who cares? But I think people have cared from the beginning, and to say otherwise, I think is not accurate. But I think, in particular, Eric Clapton led to John Mayer. You had Jay-Z. I did an interview with Francois from AP, and he mentioned that in the year 2000, Jay-Z already had 14 Audemars Piguet watches. In 2000. Wow. I mean, that's incredible, right? That was 24 years ago. Jay-Z already had 14 APs. So these guys, Pharrell has been wearing APs and other things, and Richard Mille since 2000, 20 years ago. And so these guys are so cutting edge in every way. They're not doing it for the attention. They're doing it because they live on the edge. John, for sure, the same way. But those guys in particular have played a big role in watches, for sure.
And also for John Mayer, I think that he started with a smaller niche of watches, and now he developed a lot of also knowledge. I don't know if you are guilty about that. I don't know.
He does just fine on his own, I can tell you that. But I mean, he and I talk about watches a lot over the years. He really is a lover. He wouldn't do this otherwise. Like to do the AP that he just did in Milan. He doesn't need to do that, right? But he wants to do that. And just like he doesn't need to do anything with Hodinkee, but he wants to. And he's a lover of this entire category of watches. And if he were here, he would sit right there and he would say, that's a great reference, blah, blah, blah. And he'd say, oh, I have a Stella dial with this and a Coral dial that. And he's just a lover of watches like anybody else. So he's extremely authentic in his love for watches.
Wow.
No question.
So coming back to Watches and Wonder, besides from Cartier, there are some novelties that you like it a lot?
I think most? Look, at the end of the day, there's very few new watches. There are some. The Mono Pusher from Cartier, the Tortue Mono Pusher, really nice. The movement is way better than it needed to be, if that makes any sense. Cartier could sell that watch with a hamster wheel back there, with anything. Quartz movement in there. They made a very, very nice in-house movement there, Mono Pusher. I think that's lovely. The time-only Tortue is also very nice. But for me, as a buyer, somebody that would or could buy, there's a few. There is Patek 5236P Salmon Dial, which is their inline perpetual calendar, which I think is super historical, super cool. In a case that is not quite as sharp, it's still reminiscent of a 3448, 3450, so the sharp lugs, but polished in platinum. Now a Salmon Dial inline, I think that is pure Patek. Wow. One of the larger watches that I own is a 5270P Salmon Dial, 41 millimeters. This is that, but inline perpetual. I love that watch. I think nicer than the Blue Dial. Lange, A. Langenzoon, who I love, as people know. Nothing new, but they came out with a Datograph Blue Dial white gold. Believe it or not, I've owned many Lange chronographs, but never a Datograph, because I find their platinum cases to be too heavy with that scale. But this is in white gold, so it's quite a bit lighter. And then you also get the lighter. This is how I dress, right? I mean, blues and greens. I never wear black, almost ever. And so a black Datograph was always very severe, very high contrast. Blue dial on a brown strap, I would wear it with this outfit, So that watch, it's only 125 of them made, so I probably won't get one. But I think that is really, really nice. So the Lange, the Patek, very boring things for sure. This is the Brett Shepard Chronometer Contemporary 2, but this is with Ruby dial. We put it on Hodinkee. Incredible watch. Really a perfect combination of high watchmaking, independent thinking, and jewelry making. Really with the Ruby dial. That would be a favorite. Those would be the favorite. Patek, Lange, Brett Shepard. Very, very, very expensive taste, as they say. But guilty as charged. and Cartier, the Tortue Mono Pusher is really very nice.
So you already got some amazing watches.
Yeah.
For example, the Recep that you have on your wrist. So there is a watch that you would dream of owning one day.
There are quite a few. They're individual watches. Look, there's one that I've spoken about once or twice before, which is I love the 565 Patek. I had an amazing one, 3-tone dial, Eberhard, Arabic numerals. Really nice watch. Sold it, shouldn't have. Live and learn. The watch that I want is it's a 565 owned by Briggs Cunningham, who's an American race car driver, entrepreneur, and watch collector. He had some very complicated steel Pateks that are a few blocks away in the museum. And he would live in a part of Connecticut that is very close to me. And as I already mentioned, one great American collector in Jason Singer. The idea of the American collector, I'm extremely American. I love Ralph Lauren. I wear blue jeans, you know. But the idea of an American collector participating in Swiss watchmaking back then, Henry Graves, of course, right? He was the first. James Ward Packard, JB Champion, and Briggs Cunningham. Those are the 4 big ones. So Briggs Cunningham lived very near me. So I live in New York, but close to Connecticut, where he was. He had some of the most spectacular cars. He had the very first 300 SL Gullwing in the United States, period. Wow. He had his own car company that he wanted to win Le Mans with his own brand. He raced with Jaguar, he raced with other people, but he wanted to do it his own. So really just a cool guy. And it sold once or twice at Philips many years ago, and I just didn't really put it together, or didn't really think about it, or I didn't have the money or something. But that's a watch I'd like to own, because it's Patek, it's super mint condition, 565 steel, and it's engraved on the back. And so that's one I'd love to own. Look, at $24.99, at $15.18, of course.
Can you talk about the watch you are wearing today, Ben?
Sure. So this is the Recep Recepi. They call it the RRCC2. So this watch, I met Recep probably 6 or 7 years ago at Basel World. And someone said, you just have to go see what he's doing. And I was just so blown away by what he was doing that I said, hey, if you ever do a platinum watch with a black dial, just kind of keep me in mind. And we remained close, and he obviously has earned so many accolades over the years. We've covered him extensively, put him in the magazine. I mean, really just a great guy. We become friends. And so when he introduced the CC2, which is it looks the same as the CC1, but totally new movement from ground to top. Hacking seconds, jump seconds. When you pull this out, I'll show you. Yeah. It jumps back, and you can set it to the second.
I was kind of a zero reset for Lange.
Exactly. Yeah, very similar. So I said, look, I would love to have one. He said, okay. I'll let you know. In his way, but always with a smile on his face. And then one day, I got this one, and to me, it is one of the most beautiful watches I've ever seen, and I really mean that. There have been some memories, and I said this in a story recently, of things that got me so excited. I'm like a kid again. The Le Mans Daytona. Head blown, And one thing to know about me is I never ask for a favor of anybody. I never, whatever position I'm in, I never want to abuse it, if that makes any sense. Not that I'm in any great position. But every now and then there's something that says, well, look, I have to be honest, and I would say, I would love a Daytona, the Le Mans. I would love an RRCC2. In both cases, it worked out. This is one of 10 that he's made with baguettes on the dial, which, he and I are friendly, and he really said this is, to me, the most kind of special one. And very Patek case, it's a JP Hagman case, as you know, but really feels like a 2497 almost, or even a second series 2499, but in platinum, 38 millimeters, enamel dial. You couldn't, in my opinion, you couldn't ask for much more in a contemporary watch. And then the fact that I've gotten to know him, just adds a personal level here. And at this point, Roger Smith was the first independent watchmaker I met. Before Dufour, I met Roger Smith. And so I have one of his. And so the idea that you're supporting and have a part of somebody's creativity in life is really important. And this Recep Recepi is, I said recently when I was here in November, he's playing a different game, and I think many of the other independents. I've seen or have heard of some of what he has to come down the road. There's not another Recep Recepi, I can tell you that. In terms of what he's capable of, it's just a matter of how pure he can remain, and I know he can remain pure. There's no question about it. Now it's just a matter of delivering watches. And so, he has so many new ideas over the next few years, I'm sure. but he has to produce these first. So I've had this watch for about 2 months now. I got to see him yesterday. It's very special. It really is. Just as a person, but also as a watch. This is what real watchmaking is about, but has the codes of vintage Patek. And I think sometimes when you look at vintage watches, vintage Daytonas, vintage Omegas, they're real watches, but they don't have this level of artisanship or craftsmanship. And I miss that sometimes. And I think there's two sides of me, just like there are two sides of watchmaking. There's the cool stuff, the Day-Date, which you know I love, the Daytona, which you know I love, but those are missing this. And I think
Recep.
Exactly. Yeah. Recep Recepi has the cool of the architecture of a vintage case, with the really high-end craft of independent watchmaking and vintage Patek. Really special. Imagine Patek made a watch like this today. It would be incredible.
Last question.
Sure.
What makes watchmaking so special today?
That's a really. We could do a whole video on that. I think for me, first it's the relationships, the people. Sitting behind the camera over here are two good friends. It's just amazing to see people again. But the reason that I got into it was the product. For me, and probably for you as well, it was the storytelling. The idea is that I could show. I've owned this watch for a few months now. I showed it to a neighbor of mine who doesn't. He has a date chest, not a Day-Date. How does this compare to my watch, my Day-Date? Oh, I'm sorry, my date chest. I said, where do I begin? But it's like, but he was excited. He wasn't insulted by me saying this is a totally different thing. There's so much to tell in watchmaking that still hasn't been told. And then of course the community. And so walking from the hotel over here, I saw 5 people that some knew me, I knew them. And we just got to talking about what are things happening. So for me, it's the culture and the community, but also the products. And I think. You can tell the difference between a real watch lover and people that have gotten into it more recently, perhaps, by how much they care about the product versus the cost. I can tell you I was buying Royal Oaks for nothing when I would lose money, and I was buying Reversos when I would lose money, and, buying for sure Roger Smith when I thought I would lose money. And that's the sign of people that really care. I'm not doing this is my job, first of all, but buying watches is not my job. So if I'm still spending my hard-earned money on something like this, I really care.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you to be with us today. It was a great pleasure for us.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Ben.
See you.